She said bringing me to her college reunion would be mortifying since I was just a retail electronics technician while her peers had become investment advisors and startup founders. I should have realized then that someone truly embarrassed by my profession wasn't someone I wanted to spend my life with. Diana had been obsessing over this reunion for weeks, scrolling through social media profiles of former classmates and updating me daily on who had launched which company, landed which prestigious position, or married which successful entrepreneur. I worked as a senior electronics technician at a specialty audio equipment store downtown, troubleshooting complex sound systems for recording studios, concert venues, and high-end home theater installations. The work required technical expertise that most people didn't understand, involving circuit analysis, digital signal processing, and custom hardware modifications that could take hours of precise calibration. I genuinely loved solving these technical puzzles, but Diana had increasingly begun referring to my career as just retail work whenever someone asked what I did for a living. The morning of the reunion, I watched her change outfits 3 times while obsessively checking Instagram posts from the trendy rooftop venue downtown where her graduating class was gathering for cocktails and networking. She kept muttering about how Jessica, her former roommate, would be there with her husband who owned a chain of boutique fitness studios across the metro area, and how Diana needed to project an image of success and upward mobility. She spent 20 minutes perfecting her makeup while rehearsing casual responses to questions about her relationship status and future plans. When she finally turned to face me while applying her 3rd layer of lipstick, the words tumbled out in a rush like she'd been practicing this conversation in her head for days. She explained that bringing me would inevitably create awkward conversations about our future since everyone would naturally expect to see her with someone more ambitious, more professionally accomplished, someone whose career trajectory matched the upwardly mobile path they'd all been following since graduation 5 years ago. She emphasized that these weren't shallow people, but they moved in circles where professional status mattered for social dynamics and business networking opportunities. I listened quietly, watching her face in the mirror as she convinced herself this reasoning was perfectly logical and considerate. The way she framed it, I wasn't being excluded because she was ashamed of me personally, but because she was thoughtfully protecting both of us from uncomfortable questions about our relationship timeline, our compatibility, and whether I had plans to advance into management or start my own business. I simply nodded and told her I completely understood her concerns, that she should focus on enjoying her time catching up with old friends without worrying about managing introductions or explaining my technical career to people who might not appreciate the complexity of electronics work. My calm, immediate agreement seemed to genuinely surprise her, like she'd been bracing for pushback, hurt feelings, or demands that she defend my worth to her former classmates. She quickly recovered and kissed my cheek while thanking me for being so understanding and mature about the whole situation. As I watched her leave in the expensive dress she'd bought specifically for this event, carefully coordinated with jewelry she'd charged to her credit card, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in how I saw our 2-year relationship. The woman walking out my door was someone who viewed my profession as a liability to be hidden rather than respected, someone who measured my worth by social impressions rather than personal character. Diana left that evening feeling victorious about successfully avoiding potential embarrassment, completely unaware that my quiet acceptance masked a deeper realization about what she truly thought of me as a partner and what I actually deserved from someone claiming to love me. While Diana networked with former classmates at the trendy rooftop venue downtown, I methodically began dismantling the shared life we'd built over 2 years with help from my old roommate Tyler, who arrived within an hour of my text asking if he still had access to a moving truck. Tyler didn't ask questions beyond confirming I was serious about leaving immediately, understanding that sometimes life reaches a tipping point where action becomes more important than explanation. I started with surgical precision in the bedroom, separating my clothes from hers in the walk-in closet we'd organized together just 3 months earlier when Diana insisted we needed better storage solutions for her expanding wardrobe. Every item I packed represented a small moment of reclaiming my identity from someone who'd gradually made me feel like my preferences and possessions needed to meet her approval standards. My vintage record collection filled 4 carefully labeled boxes, each album wrapped in protective sleeves I'd invested in years before meeting Diana, back when I'd believed my hobbies deserved preservation and respect rather than eye rolls about outdated technology. I left behind the expensive kitchen appliances she'd insisted we buy together for our shared cooking adventures, appliances that mostly sat unused while she ordered takeout from restaurants that matched her social media aesthetic. The stand mixer, the professional-grade blender, the espresso machine that cost more than my monthly car payment, all remained on the granite counters like monuments to her aspirational lifestyle rather than actual cooking habits. Tyler helped me carefully remove my electronics workstation from the spare bedroom, disconnecting the multiple monitors, soldering equipment, and component testing devices I used for freelance repair work in the evenings. Diana had always complained about the workspace making the apartment look cluttered and unprofessional whenever friends visited, suggesting I move everything to the garage or basement storage area where it wouldn't impact the aesthetic she'd curated for social media photos. As I packed each piece of equipment, I remembered how excited I'd been to finally have a dedicated space for my technical projects, and how gradually that excitement had transformed into apologetic explanations about why I needed to keep working on circuit boards and vintage amplifiers. The most emotionally significant item was the handcrafted coffee table I'd built during our early relationship using reclaimed wood from an old barn, spending 3 weekends measuring, cutting, sanding, and finishing every detail with the kind of attention I brought to complex electronics repairs. Diana had initially praised the table as rustic and charming, posting Instagram photos of coffee cups arranged artfully on its surface, but recently she'd been hinting about replacing it with something more sophisticated from a furniture store that specialized in contemporary design pieces that matched her evolving taste preferences. Loading that coffee table into Tyler's truck felt like rescuing a piece of myself from someone who'd stopped seeing value in anything that couldn't be immediately categorized as impressive or enviable by her social circle. I downloaded all my personal photos from our shared cloud storage account, carefully selecting images that represented my life before and during our relationship without including the countless couples photos Diana had staged for social media validation. The process of sorting through digital memories revealed how much of our documented relationship focused on her image and social presence rather than genuine moments of connection or shared experiences that mattered to both of us equally. I changed passwords on joint accounts we'd created for shared expenses, transferring my portion of utility bills and subscription services to my individual accounts while ensuring Diana wouldn't face any immediate financial disruption despite her tendency to let me handle most practical arrangements. Tyler observed my methodical approach with the kind of quiet support that comes from understanding someone's personality well enough to know when they've reached a decision point that requires action rather than discussion. By the time we finished loading the truck, the apartment had been transformed from our shared space into Diana's space with empty areas where my belongings had created evidence of my presence and interests. The garage remote, spare keys, and mailbox key went into a small pile on the granite kitchen counter next to a brief note I'd written on a piece of paper from the notepad we kept for grocery lists and household reminders. The note simply stated that I was no longer ashamed of being someone who worked with my hands and solved problems that required technical expertise, and that she should enjoy the reunion celebration without worrying about managing my feelings about her career-focused social priorities. I left those keys next to the expensive coffee maker she'd never learned to use properly, thinking about how I'd spent countless mornings making her coffee exactly the way she preferred it, a small daily gesture that had somehow become another example of my service rather than my care. Tyler's converted garage apartment became my new sanctuary within 48 hours of leaving Diana's place, a space that immediately felt more authentic than anywhere I'd lived during our 2-year relationship. The garage had been transformed into a surprisingly comfortable studio with exposed wooden beams, concrete floors that stayed cool in summer, and large windows that let in natural light perfect for detailed electronics work. I set up my workstation in the corner where I had access to multiple power outlets and could spread out circuit boards without worrying about making the space look unprofessional or cluttered according to someone else's aesthetic standards. For the first time in months, I could leave projects in progress without apologizing for their appearance or promising to clean up before guests arrived. I enrolled in advanced electronics certification courses at the community college downtown, finally pursuing the specialized training I'd been postponing while accommodating Diana's social calendar and relationship expectations. The coursework covered emerging technologies in audio engineering, digital signal processing, and renewable energy systems, subjects that genuinely excited me and represented potential career advancement opportunities I'd never seriously considered while feeling obligated to minimize my professional ambitions. Tuesday and Thursday evenings became dedicated to learning instead of attending networking events or dinner parties where Diana introduced me as her boyfriend who worked in retail technology without mentioning my actual expertise or the complexity of problems I solved daily. I started attending weekend maker workshops at the local community college, joining a group of engineers, artists, and hobbyists who appreciated technical skill regardless of job titles or social status. These workshops covered everything from 3D printing and laser cutting to microcontroller programming and custom audio equipment building, skills that directly complemented my existing knowledge while expanding into new areas of interest. The other participants included a retired aerospace engineer, a high school physics teacher, a freelance graphic designer, and a nurse who built elaborate model trains, people whose diverse backgrounds created an environment where knowledge and creativity mattered more than professional hierarchy or income levels. I reconnected with my college friend Marcus, whom Diana had consistently dismissed as too blue-collar for our social circle despite his successful career as an industrial electrician specializing in renewable energy installations. Marcus owned his own contracting business, employed 6 people, and had recently completed a major solar panel installation for a university campus, achievements that represented exactly the kind of entrepreneurial success Diana claimed to value in other contexts. During our first coffee meeting in over a year, Marcus mentioned he'd always wondered why I seemed so apologetic about my technical work whenever Diana was present, noting that my expertise in audio systems and circuit analysis was something most people found genuinely impressive when I explained it without downplaying the complexity. His observation forced me to recognize how much I'd been minimizing my own accomplishments to avoid making Diana uncomfortable about the differences in our educational backgrounds and career trajectories. The numbness that had surrounded my emotions during the move gradually gave way to clarity as I realized how much of my personality I'd compressed to fit Diana's vision of an acceptable partner who wouldn't overshadow her or create social complications at her work events and friend gatherings. I'd stopped talking enthusiastically about technical problems I'd solved, stopped sharing articles about innovations in electronics design, stopped suggesting activities that related to my interests instead of hers. Each morning began with technical reading instead of scrolling through Diana's social media posts and the relationship drama that constantly occupied her attention, a shift that reminded me how much I enjoyed learning about advances in my field and staying current with industry developments. My daily routine now included 30 minutes of studying circuit design theory, reviewing technical journals, or watching educational videos about emerging technologies, habits that had somehow become impossible to maintain while managing Diana's needs for constant validation and social engagement that required my participation as her supportive boyfriend who prioritized her goals above his own interests. Through Jessica, Diana's former roommate who had maintained occasional contact with me through social media, I learned that Diana's reunion had become a spectacular disaster that overshadowed all the professional networking she'd hoped to accomplish that evening. Jessica reached out 3 days after the event with a detailed account that revealed how completely Diana's careful planning had backfired when former classmates began asking natural questions about her long-term relationship and future plans. According to Jessica, Diana had initially tried to navigate these conversations with vague explanations about my scheduling conflicts and work commitments that prevented me from attending, responses that seemed reasonable until multiple people mentioned they'd been looking forward to finally meeting the boyfriend Diana had posted about consistently on social media for over 2 years. The evening had started normally with cocktails and casual catching up, but Diana's nervous energy became increasingly obvious as more classmates asked follow-up questions about why someone in a serious relationship wouldn't prioritize attending such an important event with their partner. Jessica described watching Diana's confidence crumble as former friends who remembered her college dating patterns began connecting between her evasive answers and her previous tendency to downplay relationships that didn't enhance her social status among their peer group. The breaking point came when someone directly asked if we were still together, prompting Diana to launch into an incoherent explanation about relationship timing and career priorities that made several people exchange concerned glances about her emotional stability. Her carefully rehearsed casual responses fell apart completely when Jessica mentioned that Diana had previously described me as her anchor and the most supportive relationship she'd ever experienced, contradictions that made her current dismissive attitude seem particularly cruel and calculated rather than based on any genuine incompatibility. Diana's nervous breakdown at the cocktail reception became the evening's main gossip topic, with former classmates witnessing her transition from confident networking to tearful defensiveness when pressed about her relationship decisions and future plans. According to Jessica's account, Diana had spent 20 minutes crying in the bathroom while other attendees speculated about whether she was going through some kind of personal crisis or relationship drama that explained her erratic behavior and contradictory statements about someone she'd previously praised extensively. The tech entrepreneur she'd been most eager to impress, someone who'd launched a successful app development company and represented exactly the kind of professional connection Diana valued, reportedly told other guests that Diana seemed emotionally unstable and possibly going through something serious that made her unsuitable for the business collaboration opportunities she'd been hinting about throughout their conversation. This assessment spread quickly among the group since several attendees worked in overlapping industries where professional reputation and emotional reliability directly impacted networking potential and business referrals. Jessica's detailed account revealed that Diana had spent the remainder of the evening attempting damage control by claiming I'd been dealing with family emergencies that required her support, explanations that only made her earlier dismissive comments seem more inconsistent and problematic to people who remembered her college tendency to create drama around relationships that didn't serve her social ambitions. The reunion that was supposed to showcase Diana's successful adult life and create valuable professional connections instead became a public demonstration of her inability to maintain stable relationships or present herself as someone worth doing business with in industries where personal character mattered as much as professional competence. By the time Diana left the venue, former classmates were discussing her behavior as a cautionary tale about how some people never outgrow their college patterns of treating relationships as accessories rather than genuine partnerships, conversations that would likely influence their willingness to include her in future networking opportunities or social gatherings where emotional maturity was expected. Jessica concluded her account by noting that several people had asked for my contact information because they remembered Diana's previous posts about my technical expertise and wanted to discuss potential audio system work for their businesses. Inquiries that highlighted how Diana's attempt to hide my profession had backfired by making her seem ashamed of someone whose skills were actually valued by successful professionals who understood the importance of technical competence in their operations. 6 weeks after the reunion disaster, Diana began a campaign of increasingly frantic communication through borrowed phones, fake social media accounts, and mutual acquaintances who clearly felt uncomfortable being recruited as intermediaries in what they could recognize as desperate attempts to regain contact with someone who had made a clean break from her life. Her initial messages came through Jessica's phone with explanations that her own device was broken, communications that demanded immediate responses and explanations for my sudden disappearance without any acknowledgement of the circumstances that had precipitated my decision to leave. The messages evolved from demanding to know why I'd abandoned our relationship without warning to tearful apologies that focused entirely on her hurt feelings rather than any recognition of how her behavior at the reunion had revealed her true attitude toward my worth as a partner. Within 2 weeks, the tone shifted dramatically to accusations that I had orchestrated a cruel punishment for what she characterized as momentary anxiety about social dynamics rather than a fundamental rejection of my professional identity and personal value that had been building for months before the reunion incident provided the final clarity I needed. A particularly revealing voicemail arrived through her friend Ashley's phone during what was clearly a wine-fueled evening of emotional processing. A rambling 15-minute message that captured Diana's rage about my failure to fight for our relationship and restore her social credibility after what she described as a minor misunderstanding about timing and logistics. The recording revealed her complete inability to understand that my calm departure hadn't been about punishment or revenge, but about recognizing that someone who viewed my profession as a social liability wasn't someone I wanted to build a future with regardless of how she chose to frame her motivations or justify her decision-making process. Diana's interpretation of events focused entirely on my supposed obligation to pursue her, convince her to reconsider her priorities, and demonstrate through persistent effort that our relationship was worth preserving despite her obvious ambivalence about being seen with someone whose career didn't enhance her social status among the professional network she was trying to cultivate. She contacted my workplace directly, claiming there was a family emergency that required immediate contact, a manipulation that forced me to involve human resources in documenting the harassment and establishing clear boundaries about personal calls during business hours. The HR representative who handled the situation noted that Diana's behavior patterns suggested someone who had difficulty accepting professional boundaries and personal decisions, observations that led to official documentation in case escalation became necessary for legal protection. My supervisor, who had previously met Diana at a company holiday party where she'd spent most of the evening networking with executives while barely acknowledging my role in the technical presentations that had impressed several major clients, expressed genuine concern about my safety and offered additional support if the contact attempts continued or intensified beyond what could be reasonably ignored. The harassment escalated when Diana created multiple fake social media profiles using variations of names from her college friend group, accounts that allowed her to monitor my activity and leave manipulative comments on posts about my certification progress and weekend workshop projects. These comments typically followed a pattern of reminiscing about shared memories, expressing confusion about my sudden coldness, and implying that I was deliberately hurting someone who had only ever tried to love and support me despite the obvious challenges created by our different professional trajectories and social backgrounds. The fake profiles also served as platforms for Diana to share articles about relationship communication, posts about the importance of working through temporary conflicts, and inspirational quotes about not giving up on love when faced with obstacles that could be overcome through mutual effort and understanding rather than abandonment and silence. I documented each instance of contact through screenshots and saved voicemails, creating a comprehensive record of behavior that clearly demonstrated escalating desperation and inability to respect clearly established boundaries about communication and contact attempts. Marcus, who had experience with a similar situation involving his ex-girlfriend's harassment campaign after their breakup, helped me understand the importance of consistent documentation and zero engagement with any communication attempts, advice that proved invaluable when Diana's behavior eventually required legal consultation about restraining orders and workplace protection measures that might become necessary if her contact attempts continued to intensify or expand into direct confrontation at my home or workplace locations. Diana ambushed me outside the community college's evening certification program on a Tuesday night in late October, appearing from behind a row of parked cars as I walked toward my vehicle after a particularly intensive class on advanced digital signal processing that had run 20 minutes longer than scheduled. She looked disheveled despite wearing expensive clothing and professionally applied makeup that couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes or the frantic energy that radiated from her posture and movements as she positioned herself between me and my car door. Her opening words tumbled out in a rush about how she'd been trying to reach me through every possible channel and couldn't understand why I was refusing to have a simple adult conversation about what she characterized as a misunderstanding that had gotten completely blown out of proportion due to poor communication and emotional reactions on both sides. I maintained my distance while she oscillated between manipulation tactics that ranged from claiming her reunion comments had been misunderstood expressions of social anxiety to demanding that I acknowledge the investment we'd both made in our relationship over 2 years of shared experiences, financial commitments, and future planning that couldn't be dismissed because of one evening's worth of awkward social dynamics. Diana's voice grew louder as she realized my steady refusal to engage was deflating her prepared arguments, transitioning from tearful apologies about her insensitivity to accusations that I was deliberately humiliating her by disappearing without explanation and making her look unstable to mutual friends who couldn't understand what had happened to our apparently solid relationship. She claimed that several people from her reunion had been asking about my sudden absence from her social media posts and questioning whether she was going through some kind of personal crisis, situations that were damaging her professional reputation and social standing in ways that seemed deliberately calculated to punish her for being honest about her career concerns. The desperation in her voice became more apparent as she insisted that I must be seeing someone else to have moved on so completely without any attempts to work through our relationship challenges, accusations that revealed her inability to comprehend that my departure had been about self-respect rather than replacement or revenge against her specific actions during the reunion incident. Diana's public meltdown in the parking lot attracted attention from other students leaving evening classes, creating exactly the kind of scene she would normally have been mortified to cause in front of strangers who might later gossip about her emotional stability and relationship drama. Security cameras later captured her following my car for several blocks through residential neighborhoods before apparently giving up when I maintained consistent speed and direction toward Tyler's apartment without acknowledging her presence or attempting to communicate through gestures or stops that might have encouraged continued pursuit. The incident convinced me to document everything through photographs, written accounts, and witness statements from classmates who had observed the confrontation and expressed concern about my safety and Diana's escalating behavior patterns that suggested someone struggling to accept clear boundaries about communication and contact. My certification program instructor, who had witnessed the parking lot incident through his office window while preparing materials for the following week's coursework, offered to provide written documentation of Diana's disruptive behavior and suggested I consider involving campus security in case future incidents occurred on college property where other students might feel threatened by aggressive confrontations. The episode reinforced my conviction that leaving had been the correct decision by demonstrating how Diana's need for control and validation had evolved into behavior that disregarded basic respect for personal boundaries and professional environments where emotional outbursts could damage reputations and create safety concerns for innocent bystanders. I realized that someone capable of ambushing me in a parking lot after weeks of unsuccessful contact attempts was someone whose version of love included possessiveness and manipulation rather than genuine concern for my well-being or respect for my clearly expressed desire to end our relationship and move forward independently. The contrast between Diana's desperate public scene and my quiet evening of technical learning highlighted how completely our values and approaches to conflict resolution had diverged during our relationship. Differences that would have only intensified over time as her need for social validation continued to clash with my preference for authentic connections based on mutual respect rather than performative compatibility designed to impress other people whose opinions shouldn't have influenced our private relationship dynamics. 8 months later, I had completed my advanced electronics certification with honors, received a promotion to senior technical specialist with a substantial salary increase, and joined a weekly board game group at the community center where I was developing a genuine friendship with Sarah, the head librarian who shared my appreciation for vintage electronics restoration and had an impressive collection of antique radio equipment that she enjoyed repairing during weekend projects. Sarah and I had been meeting for coffee every Tuesday to discuss technical articles and restoration techniques, conversations that felt refreshingly free from social performance or career competition since we both genuinely respected each other's expertise and enjoyed learning from different perspectives on problem-solving approaches. During one of our casual coffee discussions at the small independent cafe near the library, we were examining photos of a 1940s tube amplifier Sarah was restoring when Diana appeared at our table with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested she'd been monitoring my activities through social media or mutual acquaintances who still provided updates about my life despite my requests for privacy. Diana's opening statement was a transparent attempt to create doubt about my character by implying that I'd been maintaining a secret relationship during our time together. Accusations clearly designed to make Sarah question my honesty and reliability while positioning Diana as the wronged party who deserved sympathy and understanding from another woman who might not realize what kind of person she was getting involved with romantically. Sarah listened politely to Diana's implications about my supposed deception and emotional unavailability, then responded with calm directness that I had mentioned our previous relationship and the circumstances that led to our breakup, information that completely deflated Diana's attempt to create drama through selective revelation of relationship history. My response was equally direct and final, explaining that I had left because Diana had shown me exactly who she was through her actions and attitudes, and that my life had become genuinely peaceful and fulfilling in ways that confirmed I'd made the right decision to prioritize self-respect over relationship convenience. Diana's face went through several expressions as she realized that neither Sarah nor I was going to participate in the emotional scene she'd orchestrated, her manipulation tactics failing completely when faced with two people who valued authentic communication over dramatic confrontation and social positioning games. Sarah's subtle but firm support was evident in how she remained calm and present during Diana's attempts to create chaos, demonstrating the difference between someone who appreciated genuine connection and someone who treated relationships as performance opportunities designed to manage other people's perceptions and validate personal insecurities through external drama. Diana's final exit from the cafe was notably quiet compared to her dramatic entrance, the deflated posture of someone whose manipulation strategies had been rendered ineffective by encountering people who refused to engage with emotional chaos and relationship games that thrived on uncertainty and reactive responses. As I watched Diana leave for what I knew would be the last time, I felt complete emotional liberation from the toxic patterns that had characterized our relationship, patterns I now recognized as fundamentally incompatible with the kind of authentic partnership I wanted to build with someone who valued my actual qualities rather than trying to reshape me into someone more socially advantageous. The afternoon with Sarah continued peacefully with our technical discussion and plans for a weekend visit to an electronic surplus store where we could search for vintage components for our respective restoration projects. The kind of shared activity that represented everything Diana had never understood about finding joy in mutual interests rather than using relationships as vehicles for social advancement and external validation that required constant management and performance.